Yeah, a couple. First of all, thank you for including the development of performance measures. And let me acknowledge that this is, I believe, the first program to take the step of collaborating with stakeholders to develop performance measures. So congratulations for that. You've made me extremely happy. A tiny little picky thing, though. In the resolution, the item regarding working with stakeholders to develop performance measures was in the whereas section rather than resolve. I was wondering why.
I don't know. We can move it. It's we take it all as direction to develop the model criteria and
well, just to make me even happier than I was before and still am, let's move it to the resolves. And then my other question has to do with the provision for staff to consider proposed alternatives and modifications to the criteria. I'm certainly supportive of that flexibility, recognizing that there might be site-specific and other factors that need to be weighed in. I'm curious, though, given the very involved and transparent process that it's been utilized by staff to engage stakeholders in the development of these criteria and to engage experts, how would we, or how would you propose to carry forth that level of transparency and engagement in considering alternative proposals?
So during the interim, we've had a lot of dialogue with Dogger staff as well as with the operators on any proposed groundwater monitoring plan or request for written concurrence. I would foresee that we would continue that level of discussion on what we're looking for with respect to completeness of an actual groundwater monitoring plan submittal to us. Obviously, some things have changed quite a bit, actually. So there's going to be a learning process associated with that. But I believe we'll be able to have that kind of dialogue with the regulated folks, the operators, as well as with Doggers, with our collaborative approach to reviewing these permits and plans that come forth. Does that address your question, or are you thinking more in terms of something else?
Maybe I'm putting needless worry into this issue, but it occurs to me that you've all worked very hard to develop these criteria, and a lot of stakeholders, not just the regulated community, but also NGOs and obviously other agencies have been involved in considering alternatives. Shouldn't there be a commensurate level of engagement, perhaps not as extensive as this has been, but I guess what I'm seeking is, I guess, some assurance that any alternatives that we might be considering approval does have some opportunity for public input and not just be internally approved without some opportunity for airing of these alternative proposals.
I think that's a great suggestion. It's not one we thought of, to be blunt, in the last month. And so we will think about, my off-the-cuff suggestion would be to think about prior to the staff's approval that there'd be that it would be noticed for public comment for 2 weeks. Make it short, make it,
yeah.
And
I think that would be a very prudent step to add.
That's a good idea. I think transparency is a good idea here, historically. Thank you. Other questions?
Oh, I do have one question. Are you planning on setting up a technical advisory committee?
they're looking at me.
I'm sorry, I thought that recommendation pertained to potential pilot projects and not an overall? Or was I misunderstanding that?
So it pertains to the regional monitoring component that's under our purview. And I think we'll look into how best to organize that. I'm concerned if we put anything in here that we do not create a extension of the board which doesn't allow them to meet without having going through the 10-day notice for everything and all their meetings in public. We have done advisory groups in the past for Gamma, and we've looked at input from folks, and so we will figure out a way to include technical advisors. We, of course, are going to be looking to our experts to help us on that, and we're going to be contracting with our experts to actually
In
implement
a
it. So-
continuing way, that, I was assuming that, but I wanted to ask that.
Yeah, but we don't have a specific requirement in here, and there are reasons why that doesn't make sense.
All right, we have public comment. That's, we have more questions after that. It can be 5 minutes. First, we have Gail Delahunt from Western Growers, followed by Kevin Buchan. I never know how to pronounce your name, Kevin. Buchan, sorry, from WISPA. Hi.
Am I on? Here I am. Gail Delahunt with Western Growers Association. I'm here to speak in support of the changes you made regarding the regional monitoring portion of the regulations. And I appreciate the staff's work on this and your willingness to meet with us and discuss this. It's very important, especially for my Kern County folks. Complying with the Irrigated Lands Program with the groundwater component and the groundwater sustainable program that they will be very involved in. And after meeting with the Central Valley Regional Board yesterday, it would be very critical to include CV salts in that discussion, and so that all the programs are coordinated together and working together to provide really good information. So appreciate that.
Right, well, looking for that integrated efficiency as well as more information is the name of the game. So thank you for the work you've spent trying to figure out where there are win-wins in all of this. Appreciate that.
Just to, Ms. Delahunt mentioned the regional program, but the area-specific program also calls out the use of other monitoring wells for the program, so it's for both aspects.
Yeah, we don't necessarily want to just punch more holes everywhere. Right. Good. Mr. Buchan, followed by Andrew Grinberg from Clean Water Action.
Thank you, Chair Marcus and members of the board. That's okay. It's like Buchanan without the extra AN. That's what we used to say when I was in school. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and speak for you today. My name is Kevin Buchan with the Western States Petroleum Association. I'm also joined by Peter Zawaslansky from Terraphase Engineering, who we retained to assist us in a lot of the technical details for this program. I think we just wanted to start out and express our thanks to staff. They've done a pretty good job working with us. We appreciate that. There's been a lot of work on a very hectic schedule, and we appreciate the effort that they've extended to us. So thank you very much for letting us take so much of their time. You know, these criteria are kind of the first of their kind. It's going to very highly regulate our industry. We've appreciated the ability to participate as a stakeholder on a really important matter to us. We do believe the proposed guidelines as they are before you today, including the change sheets that you've seen, for the most part with just a few changes that we will be recommending in our testimony today, do balance the need to ensure environmental protection while providing monitoring plans that are fit for the field and allow operators the flexibility to continue to do well stimulation safely and responsibly. With that regard, we'd like to just talk about three things. I think we've touched on a couple of those, so these shouldn't be a big surprise. We made a request to reinsert the 200-gallon trigger for the aquifers that have to be monitored. The State Water Board has a threshold for beneficial use. We've had the discussions with staff about the drinking water standard versus beneficial use. We think that considering what would be required, the additional footprint for additional monitoring wells, because we'd have to have 1 up gradient, 2 down gradient wells for aquifers at a 200 gallon per day, which is about 16 ounces of water in a minute. And without that threshold even there, we will then have to monitor all wells, regardless of what kind of flow. So we thought that that was an appropriate level that was in the original regulations that were issued, and then it was withdrawn from the revised regulations. And we'd just like to ask that that be reinserted. On surface spills, we've had discussions with staff, which we think were very productive. Current regulations for the Spill Containment and Control Program, or SPCC, are in place with our members right now. If you have a surface spill, you have to immediately clean it up. Long before any kind of contaminants would reach a groundwater aquifer, even if it's shallow. We think that this program should be incorporated into the groundwater model criteria as a part of it, so that we're not waiting for any kind of spill that is going to reach the aquifer and therefore have to expand the footprint of the area by putting in an up gradient and 2 down gradient wells. In addition to that, in the event that there is any concern by the Regional Water Board or the State Water Board that there might be contamination, the board still has the authority to require monitoring be put in place. And that is not an uncommon measure where spills have potentially reached the groundwater aquifer in question. So our thought is rather than just mandate putting in an up gradient, down gradient well, extending the footprint, we would just ask the board to incorporate the SPCC plan requirements into the model criteria. Lastly, there's a part in the regulations about addendums. And what this pertains to is if you have an existing State Water Board approved monitoring program and you go to put another well stimulation treatment well within that monitoring plan, we've asked, and we've put this in our comments, that we would have more of an abbreviated ministerial requirement as opposed to resubmitting everything that we would normally do if it was a brand new well in a brand new area. So we'd like to actually have the regulations reflect that. This would provide staff with adequate information to essentially verify that where we would be putting in a new well stimulation well, treatment well, would be in an area that's already covered and approved. And with that, that's all we have to say for today. I'd be happy to take questions, and thank you for your time.
Yes, I'd be interested in staff's response to these 3 requests.
Clarify the amount of water that the 200 gallons is.
200 gallons per day? Per day, yes.
That flow is how many a minute? That was one of the issues.
It's about a pint. It's about 16 ounces of water over a period of a minute.
So, as Janice said earlier, we're looking at all beneficial uses of water, in that our discussions with our experts earlier today, there are folks that have wells that have a flow rate at that level. So they collect them in a pressure vessel or some sort, and they're able to use the water. So especially in time of drought, I mean, people may be in an area where it's remote, they need access to the water, so right. I'm going to keep going. So the contingency issue with respect to the shallow aspect of it, we see that as Dr. Esser said earlier, that one of the more vulnerable portions of the groundwater resource is that shallow zone, and that activities associated with well stimulation potentially do have an impact on that zone. So we believe that with the revision of the language to not look at every single protected aquifer, that the most vulnerable would be that first, and we would recommend that first aquifer still be monitored without a contingency, and also that base of protected water zone be tested. And we've inserted the language with respect to the contingency for those zones in between, or if there are potential pathways that would indicate that there's a need to do additional sampling in those zones, that we would pursue that type of an approach.
What about
Can I-
the argument that you can have a surface spill and get it all cleaned up before it goes anywhere? I think that's part of the argument, is to say that with the spill prevention rules, that if it's contained or it's all scooped back up and there's no way, I think the argument is then why should they do more wells?
So I want to
I'm just thinking expense. That's,
jump in and say that there's another component to this conceptual model that we have of the highest, the most shallow water and the deepest water, and not the intermediate zones. And if you think about it, the pressure testing, which is integral to the development and the stimulation activity, will give you an idea if you have a well blowout or loss of fluid or well containment. And so that makes a lot of sense that you would know for those. Where you won't know from a pressure testing real-time analysis is if you have something coming up from the formation, which is why the deepest, or coming down from the surface, which is why we're proposing the surface. There is, obviously, we have lots of requirements on people to address spills, and we have lots of Superfund sites. So spills are a problem that have happened for generations and will continue to happen, and the level of response to those are erratic in the world. And so we believe that the highest potentials should have real water quality monitoring associated with them.
so quite apart from the spill issue, so quite apart from a spill issue, we should just be doing both of these layers wherever we're doing this work, because that's going to give people the level of comfort
That's correct.
that there's not a problem, given that this is an area fraught with discomfort.
That's correct. And it is the area that's the most likely to be used for beneficial use, is that uppermost aquifer.
But
Pardon me.
we're still getting, I mean, we want those who have spills and know about them to clean them up real fast, correct?
And this doesn't change that.
Right, okay.
And microphone's not behaving. And one of the advantages of the SPCC regulations is it requires that immediate cleanup for the obvious environmental reasons. We think that that is not only adequate, but that is an excellent kind of immediate protection to prevent any kind of spills that would reach a groundwater aquifer, as opposed to just punching in 3 new holes. So that is the reason why we take that position.
Could I just weigh in here? You know, just to clarify our recommendation, it wasn't for first encounter water, it was for the highest quality water, which is generally going to be a shallow groundwater aquifer. And our concern is not just with spills, but with, you know, detecting impact in the future. And again, you know, it doesn't alleviate any of the needs to establish baseline. And in many ways, these shallow aquifers are the most dynamic. You know, you have agricultural inputs, you have spills, you have recharge, all affecting those aquifers. So you do need to characterize them quite well. And in addition, I would just second that these are the aquifers you care most about, because they're what are going to be used.
Right, that's helpful. Now, I was distracted by the spill issue, but the issue of characterizing these basins is part of the whole point of doing this ahead of the curve, so that we know we can characterize. It's in your interest, in my view, not that I'm there to say what your interest is, but it's in your industry's interest to have this stuff characterized ahead of the curve, in my humble opinion.
These shallow aquifers also offer the greatest opportunity for integration or coordination with other programs such as irrigated lands or CV salts.
And, you know, our position on using the SPCC plan as by reference is it doesn't preclude staff or regional board from saying, hey, you spilled something, you need to put in a monitoring well. So we're not saying that whatsoever. We just think as an initial step that if we're not seeing a surface spill, which is very visible, that putting in 3 monitoring wells for that, we just think the SPCC program does a better job of that.
I think this relates, Board Member Dodek brought up something earlier about distinguishing major versus minor leaks, and I think this, and maybe Dr. Esser, correct me if I'm wrong, but this recommendation also would be able to capture incremental minor leaks that spills might not trigger.
Well, in talking with our members, the pressure testing will even pick up the minor leaks. If there's any drop in pressure, they've told us that the hydraulic fracturing event immediately stops. So if it's a minor pressure leak, if it's a large pressure leak, it shuts it down.
But what is minor versus major? One person's minor could be another person's major, or vice versa.
Essentially, our position is if there's a leak, it gets shut down because the pressure monitoring will detect it. So whether it's a minor leak or a major leak, the hydraulic fracturing event gets shut down.
The third issue, Mr. Borkovich, do you have a reaction on the addendum? Weren't you trying to do what Mr. Buchan was suggesting?
Well, we have, how it works, how we've proposed is that an addendum to an approved groundwater monitoring plan, so that would be an area with a monitoring network in place that's been approved. For any additional wells to be stimulated in that area, we would need a map that was submitted with the original groundwater monitoring plan that shows the area with a 1 mile buffer that includes information such as other oil and gas wells and water supply wells in the area. We would need that information to assess whether or not that new well to be stimulated would fit in that design network. And any additional information on boreholes near that well that would intersect 2 times the ADSA, we would need that information to look at if there were any other potential pathways for that well.
So are you saying you need the full submission again versus an abbreviated submission, or?
It's not a full submission. We're asking for a map, an updated map, and then detailed information on that well to be stimulated or any boreholes that intersect 2 times the ADSA or any faults within 5 times the ADSA.
And we agree with staff that's submitting like a verification package. It just some of the language that is currently in the regulations right now within the change sheets we think is fairly extensive for just verifying that. We don't object to that whatsoever. Our members support being able to say, look, we have an existing monitoring plan that the board has approved, and we're going to put another well in within that plan and to provide enough documentation so staff is comfortable enough to know that they know where that well is going to be within the existing plan. And so the existing regulations just add quite a bit more information, and we think is beyond just having a verification. We'd be happy to continue working with staff to kind of reach some resolve on that, but some of the requirements are still fairly extensive for just a verification.
So if the board members looked at page 18 of the red line strikeout, the change sheet number 1, there's a list of what's required at the bottom of that page. This is the section that they're discussing.
So part of the concern and the reason why we're requesting this smaller subset, not a complete resubmittal, is that if there's a proposed well that may be along the fringe of one of these areas, it's possible we would want to explore with the operator potentially that there may be additional monitoring necessary since it's up against that edge, for instance. That's just an example. So this, I think, bare minimum or minimal amount of data that we're requesting will help us make that type of an evaluation without having the back and forth of, hey, can you give us more information? We need more information type of scenario that we've gone through a little bit through the interim period. So we try to be as complete as possible with the language in here to make it clear that those are the type of information and data that we're looking for to make those types of assessments.
So you're not having a conversation about what's enough back and forth? You're saying we want this?
That's correct.
But can you imagine that there might be some wells going into an existing area, another well going into an existing area where it's not on the fringe, but it's in the middle, and you might not need as much information? Is that possible?
The groundwater monitoring plans are approved for a certain set of wells, as opposed to requests for exclusion as an area that we've defined that doesn't have protected water. but the groundwater monitoring plans are for a certain set of wells. So we would need to know information for additional wells being stimulated in that area, just to make sure that it meets the criteria for groundwater monitoring.
And when you saw on that graphic with the Century approach where, staff showed there's whole, well stimulation treatment wells that go straight down, then some that fan out, and they drew that boundary. Our thought is that if we have another stimulation well that's within that boundary, then if we can just demonstrate it's still within that boundary, and then we think that would be adequate. Some of the requirements in number 1 and 2 ask for a lot of additional information that's already been submitted. So that's the reason why we're requesting something that's a little more scaled down. It will require less staff time to be doing the review for that, especially since it's in a monitoring area that's already been approved.
So I think actually both of those statements that the staff made and that Mr. Buchanan made are correct. There will be instances where they could say, we're doing a well that's exactly like the other wells that we've done in this area, and we could only give you that small amount of information. There are going to be other instances where the well is going to be a little different, and there's some of this information is needed, and there'll be other instances where it's a new well at the edge of the boundary or into a slightly different zone, and all the information is needed. The problem that we have is distinguishing that now in the abstract is very difficult. And so what we're proposing is that they give us a set of information, some of which will be duplicate information out of their regional or their area-specific monitoring plan, but it would provide less back and forth and less interaction, we believe, and time in the overall.
Sort of like when you ask, you give me a full set of things when we're doing another briefing on something we've talked about, as opposed to having me rummage through my files and find where I
That's
put
correct.
those things that are substantially similar. So it's faster for me if you give me the full set.
That's correct. So it's a combination. We're not asking for a full groundwater monitoring plan, but we're asking for this information subset out of that plan, all put together and given to us as an amendment. I totally understand their concern, and I can see situations where they'd be exactly right. They could do it in 2 pieces of paper, and it would be faster and easier in that example. But I can also see many examples where that wouldn't be the case, and I don't know how to write the regulation to capture that in all instances.
We have one more speaker, so we should listen to them.
Thank you.
Helping us understand that. Mr. Grunberg?
Thank you, Chair Marcus and board members. Andrew Grunberg with Clean Water Action. First of all, want to show our strong support for this, for the model criteria, and express our appreciation to staff, both at the Water Board and the institutions that have been involved in providing recommendations. The public participation process was really well run, and we feel like we had adequate opportunities to weigh in a number of times, and so we very much appreciate that. Regarding some of the specific things that are in the change sheet and in discussion today, just like to offer the perspective from an environmental group. First of all, this discussion about which aquifers need monitoring in them. Removing any aquifers that have beneficial use that should be protected from monitoring makes us uncomfortable, and especially after hearing from Mr. Madrid saying, that potentially minor leakages wouldn't be caught in a pressure test, and then also with the perspective that over time there may be other types of migration that we wouldn't be detecting in the immediate time when well stimulation is happening. And this is all in the context of the goal of this criteria is not for immediate leak detection of the short term. This is to get our baseline information. This is to detect changes over the long term and medium term. And so if we're not getting baseline information on that, the middle of the 3 aquifers, that is a concern for us. I would say especially for that shallow aquifer, which industry was expressing concern about. We definitely want to see monitoring in that. The spill contingency plan is definitely not adequate for those long-term changes in water quality, and we still need that baseline information. especially, considering the legacy of thousands of open wastewater pits all throughout oil fields in California. And we've, still got some 900 or so open pits. We're not even actually sure the exact number. The May 29th letter that you signed to a couple of legislators indicated that some regions are still investigating how widespread those pits are. And so, to suggest removing shallow aquifers from monitoring seems definitely inappropriate. The same logic applies to removing the 200-gallon threshold per day. If it's a protected aquifer, we need the information, and so we appreciate that change. Overall, we strongly support this. We would like to see, a couple of those more protective measures put back in, and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you for working with us as well. Other comments or questions? Just the middle aquifer issue. I took that just to be you'd have indicators at the top and the bottom. You have an ability to ask for more if there's any indication that you need more, and it was an attempt to try and save a little bit of money or a little bit of punching of.
That's correct. And remember that we talk about it as the middle, but it might be the middle 6 or the middle 4 aquifers. It's not
Can you
necessarily.
think of that hamburger Hamlet chocolate cake thing?
Yeah, we don't know. In many instances, it's a different number in between. And so our original proposal asked for 2 down gradient, 1 up gradient for each of those aquifers based on reflection from the level of risk and the information we received from the operators on the pressure testing. We felt that the level of risk was smaller in the intermediate. There's no elimination 100% of risk. And so, but looking at that and looking at the benefit of having those wells in all instances, there are going to be instances where we feel it's important. One that didn't get mentioned today because it wasn't a change and nobody talked about it is Century Wells went to a water supply well. If it's in an intermediate aquifer, that's going to have a Century well put in to monitor in between. And so it's not that we're totally discounting them, but we were trying to identify those that had the highest potential. We are also, I think that you should keep in mind, we'll be instituting starting in January the regional monitoring, and my impression from what I've heard from our experts is that this is going to be an investigation of where is the base of fresh water, what does our aquifers look like in relation to oil fields. We may well come back from information about that saying we need to change our model criteria at some point in the future based on our regional approach.
Right, and you will be back. That was one of the things I wanted you to make sure you mentioned, which was how we will be keeping tabs on this, since it's an important issue, and it's also important, as always, to keep TAM happy.
Right, well that's
reporting, I'm just asking it right there before she gets to it.
That's on the performance reporting. We will also be coming back to you every 2 years on the regional monitoring, what we found.
Yeah, that's going to be important.
From the regional monitoring.
So we are going to be very active in reviewing this in our open sessions. That also allows for public opportunity, discourse, et cetera. And I do think that's important in this evolving field, and also for the credibility and our ability to actually really take our groundwater basins seriously from a quality standpoint in particular, let alone quantity.
And if I don't schedule these things every couple of years, you just talk to Karen about drought all the time. So you need something else to think about.
We need something else. Questions,
on
comments?
Well, it relates to the layer cake, but my earlier comment about any clarifying language about closest proximity to the zone of well stimulation. If you think it's unnecessary, that's fine, but I felt like it was missing when I read the regulation.
Michael and I discussed it, and we, not to be argumentative, we don't think that it adds to clarity on it. We feel that it's already clear enough.
Good. No, that's fine.
Well, getting back to making Tam happy, I think you have some proposed language.
Yes, this addresses the concern that Board Member Dodek had raised about the alternatives on a project-specific proposal and whether or not they would be considered publicly, or not considered publicly, but there would be an opportunity for public input on those alternatives. And so the language that I have come up with, I haven't had a chance to share it with staff or John, so if they have concerns, they can certainly voice them. But this would be on change sheet number 1. Page 9 within section 1.3, which describes the scope. There is a paragraph that was added in that change sheet that says that the water boards may consider alternatives and proposals. And so I would simply, and that's, came up as a result of our comments, and to address Board Member Dodek's concern, we would add a new sentence in that paragraph. It would be the second to the last sentence, and it would say, prior to approving a proposed alternative or modification considered pursuant to the prior sentence, comma, a water board shall provide at least 15 days, that's S apostrophe, notice, and an opportunity to comment on the proposal, period. And that ensures that we do provide some added public process for these alternatives.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And that change, along with moving whereas 17 into, I guess, Resolve 4.
Yes.
And then renumbering accordingly. And with the change sheet 1 and change sheet 2, I will move for adoption.
Second?
Any discussion?
And no discussion except to congratulate staff on coming within the spirit of the legislation, if not on the first.
And thanks to our science panel and the stakeholder input, and it was critical to meet this deadline as well. Thank you.
Thank you for my performance measures.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you all. I think caution is called for, so I think this was good. Thank you for everybody spending the time on it. It's interesting. Next item, can we try and get into the next item? Is that okay? But I don't know. Is it really a 3-hour item, the next item?
I think we can get it done in half an hour or less.
No, this says 3 on mine. It says 3 hours for this one on mine, which I thought you were just trying to overcompensate for us being wrong all the time, the other way. Let's give it a try without cutting it short. Item number 6.
It shouldn't take 3 hours. It should take 30 minutes.
Oh, we'll see. Maybe that's, all right. Great. If you can take your conversations out into the hallway, that would be great. Thank you. I just wanted us to give you our undivided attention. So, item number 6.
Is it on? Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Marcus and board members. My name is Ariana Villanueva, and I'm with the NPDS Wastewater Unit in the Division of Water Quality. Here with me is Phil Iserina and Marley Wood, and coming up is Diana Messina. Today I will provide a brief background on the NPDES cost of compliance effort since the November 2014 State Water Board meeting. I'll present the Phase 1 plan that implements the recommendations in this effort, and then I'll provide an update on the progress so far. At the November 2014 State Water Board meeting, staff presented a report with the recommendations to reduce the cost to comply with NPDES permits. The State Water Board then directed staff to develop a plan to implement the recommendations, and then staff formed a work group to develop the NPDES cost of compliance plan. The work group consists of state and regional water board staff, SWRCB, and representatives of discharger groups and environmental organizations. The work group will be implementing the recommendations in 2 phases. Phase 1 will address the short-term projects, and Phase 2 will address the long-term projects. The work group has identified the projects that can be completed in Phase 1 and developed a plan that includes the actions that address the recommendations, the parties responsible for completing the actions, the timelines to complete the actions, and the products that will result from implementing the actions. And then the work group will identify the long-term projects and develop a Phase 2 plan at a later date. Staff held a kickoff meeting in January 2015, and the work group met several times to discuss and incorporate the feedback on the Phase 1 plan until it was finalized in April 2015. I just wanted to note that Regional Water Board staff also participated in the development of the Phase 1 plan, specifically on actions that require Regional Water Board assistance. Just for reference, I included the recommendations that staff presented at the November 2014 State Water Board meeting. The Phase 1 plan contains projects that address these recommendations. And I will now talk about the progress of the Phase 1 project. And this slide just shows the remaining recommendations. So now I will go over the progress of the projects. All projects implementing the 9 recommendations have been started, and each project has its own work plan to track its progress. The work that has been completed is as follows. State Water Board staff put together regulations and policies that establish minimum monitoring frequencies to see the extent that permit writers can adjust the monitoring frequency for dischargers in good compliance. State Water Board staff also conducted cross-training for TMDL and planning staff on NPDES permitting procedures. State Water Board staff updated the Training Academy on NPDES program needs to ensure training is available for permit writers, and this will allow for continued permit writer efficiency. The State Water Board staff also created an intranet page for the NPDES Administrative Procedures Manual to ensure the program procedures are regularly maintained and easy to access for permit writers. This will promote permit writing consistency within the NPDES program. The Training Academy provided compliance evaluation inspection training to train inspectors to conduct consistent compliance inspections through the use of an inspection checklist. Permit writers who also attended benefited by learning to write clear and enforceable permits. And lastly, USEPA conducted training on NPDES permit writers, conducted training for NPDES permit writers to review mixing zone studies consistently. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So as I mentioned, each project has its own work plan, and this example is for the project to address duplication of permit receiving monitoring requirements through regional monitoring programs. The purpose of this project is to review existing regional monitoring programs to identify the potential use of regional monitoring in lieu of individual monitoring. Each project work plan has the following format. The first column lists the actions that will be done to address the recommendation. The second column shows the party that is responsible for completing the action. The third and fourth columns show when the actions will begin and when it is due. And then the last column shows the products that will result from implementing these actions. Would you like me to go over the actions in this example work plan? No?
I had a question, but I don't know that it can be answered right now. Looking at this one example, I really appreciate the layout and appreciate the short-term products. But keeping in mind that this whole effort was geared towards reducing costs, improving efficiency, effectiveness, that sort of thing. So, and again, as part of the performance measure sort of initiative, the short-term products for now are still output oriented, appropriately so. So I guess my question, and it might be more of a question to Adam, is at some point, Adam and CASA and people who provided input and developed these recommendations, how do we take this and actually translate it into the outcome metrics that I'm always pushing for? And that is, where is the reduction in costs? Where is the reduction in time or the increase in efficiency? How do we get from outputs to outcomes?
One outcome could be more items on the uncontested calendar instead of, 2-hour hearings. That's an example.
Well, there'll be more happy faces rather than frowny faces. I mean, just in general, it's a question of how much time people have to spend. I mean, this is just one example, I know, but a lot of it is just the frustration level. That one of the things I thought was interesting in the things that people wanted, some of them will result in dollars and cents, and time is money. Time saving might be a part of it, but also folks being able to focus on maintaining clean water rather than frustrating paperwork and inconsistent application of the same rule will have a qualitative effect. I don't mean to be joking about the smiley face and the frowny face, but that relationship that we have with people where they feel they're working hard and the stuff they're working on seems to matter versus being frustrated is one of the big values, including some of this stuff. But we'll get a report on that somehow. So I think Tam's question is a good one looking forward, which is how will we know that this was really helpful? And some of it's going to have to be narrative, and some of it will be collecting time estimates probably, right, as well as dollars and cents.
This is Phil Estrina, if I may take a stab. One outcome that we're looking forward to getting from all these efforts is getting rid of the backlog, and that means that we'll be reissuing our expired permits before they expire. And one advantage of doing that is we'll be updating our requirements in our permits, and therefore we'll be incorporating the latest policy, plan, guidelines, regulation requirements in our permits.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer.
All right. So this next slide just shows the remaining actions on that example work plan. The next steps will be to provide an update to the State Water Board in 6 months and to continue to complete the Phase 1 projects. And then staff will then convene the work group to develop the Phase 2 plan and identify the long-term projects. When that plan is finalized, staff will present the Phase 2 plan to the State Water Board, and then finally staff will implement the Phase 2 plan. So that concludes my presentation.
Phase 2 is other work groups such as stormwater or WDR, or is it Phase 2 within NPDES?
Phase 2 within NPDES. It's the same work group. We'll just be working on developing the Phase 2 plan for long-term projects.
Thank you. Yeah, or long-term.
2 phases, short-term and long-term projects.
So my only other question is, in the informal plan, there's I think, what page is this? Page 6. There's an item regarding implement phased approach to TMDLs, and the due date on that is to be determined based on coordination with the TMDL roundtable. Can you give me a better estimate than to be determined with respect to this effort?
According to Rick Rasmussen, the TMDL group has proposed draft regional water board resolution language and proposed changes to the impaired water guidance. which are currently being reviewed by OCC or by council. And he also stated that he's been trying to set an appointment with board member Dodak and Mr. Bishop to attend the TMDL roundtable meeting on the phased implementation of TMDLs, but finding their availability has been difficult.
Wow, way to answer that question.
Rick gets a
All right,
raise.
Mr. Bishop and I will get together with Rick and make sure that happens, Mr. Bishop.
It seemed to have slipped my mind, I'm sorry, but we will make sure now that it's been publicly humiliating
Yes.
that I do it.
That will teach me to ask questions. No, thank you. I really appreciate all of your hard work on this to date, as well as going forward. I know that coordinating with our colleagues at the regional water boards, at EPA, and as well as all the stakeholders involved is not an insubstantial task. So I really appreciate it. And again, my question with respect to outcomes is to mainly, and fix in everyone's mind that we're doing this for a reason, a very important reason. It's not just a bureaucratic exercise, but keeping our eyes on the end goal of what we're trying to achieve is going to be a critical factor in being successful in this. So I really appreciate all of your efforts.
And what I'm reminded of, Tom, is that we should be sharing this information with the chairs of the regional boards, because they may not be clued into this. And because they are so concerned about getting new priorities covered when they, when they're high priority, but yet nevertheless new, making sure that we're being as efficient as possible on the ongoing priorities is important.
Make it part of the first discussion and the item that they want to pursue in more detail.
Steve, we'll put that on the list.
Yeah, that sounds good. It would be great to, it's almost trickle up the information. But having, being an alumni of the MPDS division in San Francisco Bay region, I really appreciate those details you went through in terms of, the follow-up, the commitments to do the training, the integration of planning and the TMDL and the MPDS staff, and getting EPA guidance on consistent application of the tools, because it falls right out of the group's recommendations. But I'm always, sensitive to how staff, respond to this, and how are the evaluations of these trainings? Did staff feel like they were going to see efficiencies in their work moving forward, and what was the general feedback at the staff level?
Hello, over here, Diana Messina, and the reason I'm answering your question is because I was one of the trainers for the NPDS compliance inspection training, and we gave that training for 2 years. One was in 2014, then we gave it again this year in 2015. In 2014, a lot of the staff from the regional boards that attended were fearful that they were learning something different than what their supervisors back in their own office were guiding them to do. But it appears that as we had worked with the roundtable through this last year, this time around, the regional board staff that was in the room, they either had already seen the checklist, were already using the checklist, or their supervisor told them to come to the training. So with time, with all these conversations, and I agree with your concept of trickling up, the information is getting out there. Then Phil, do you want to just touch bases on the other training that took place?
Sure. Thank you, Diana. We also conducted the NPDS permit writers training for TMDL and planning staff, and the planning staff and TMDL staff greatly appreciated the training that we conducted. We did one down south and one up here, and in fact, they are inviting us to attend or present the same information in their roundtable. We haven't set the schedule yet, but the cross-training is very much appreciated and very much needed, because each of us will be better permit writers and they will be better planners and TMDL staff in knowing how we permit writers implement their plans and their TMDLs.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks for all the hard work. Oh, we have a speaker, sorry. Mr. Link, Adam Link from the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, sorry.
Afternoon, Chair Marcus and board members. I think, thank you first to staff for working with us over the last probably 6 or 7 months to turn what was the staff report into this informal plan and the individual work plans. I think it's gotten a lot more specific from what it was to what it is now, and there's a lot more action items in there that we can kind of follow up on things that have been done. So we do appreciate that. I think it probably makes sense just to answer Board Member Dodek's question first about what we expect to be the tangible items and what the outputs will be that we can measure in the future. Outcomes we can measure in the future. I think the first one is probably, I would say, cultural is the best way to describe it. I think all the trainings that they've been going through, I think all the kind of attention that the resource alignment effort has been getting is actually resonating. And to the example, I have anecdotal stories from some of our members that say they were in a permit renewal process and they raised, okay, this is what's going on, you know, the resource alignment initiative, these are the things that we're looking at, and they were able to sit down and say, okay, this is something that may not be necessary. Can we reduce it? Are there efficiencies to be gained here? And they were able to do that. And I'm not able to quantify that in terms of a dollar amount, but those are the kinds of things I'm hearing even before the checklist has already been fully implemented. So I think that's kind of the cultural side of it. And then as we move through some of the task items, and ultimately we will have this kind of longer checklist of ideas relating to maybe surrogate sampling or a report, you know, is this report necessary? As each individual permit writer goes through, I think that will be reflected in permits as they are renewed. And so have kind of a quantifiable measure or outcome or output that you'd get from that, and you'd be able to bring back and say, yes, we're changing kind of how we look at permits and where the efficiencies are. And I think that's probably the best thing that can come of this, because there are, I mean, every permit is individual, every region is different. It's very tough to come up with a statewide kind of set of things where you say this is what is needed. But if you come up with kind of what we've developed, which is a little bit of a checklist and all the concepts that are there, sample language, all the things, all the tools you can give the permit writers to use, I think that will turn around and eventually, I mean, it will obviously take time, but we will see those kinds of outcomes. And so if we can, we'll be able to report back on those as we do, and perhaps that's something we add at the end of the checklist, is just what are the items that you've looked at. But that is what we hope to be the outcome. So I just wanted to comment and thank staff for their help in this effort. I think they've been doing a great job, and I look forward to working with them on the more specific items over the next 4 or 5 months.